She got off the train at Blacktown a little before 10 that night, stepping onto the platform with the tired, automatic motions of someone who had worked a long shift and just wanted her own bed. Anita Cobby adjusted the strap of her bag and started the walk she had taken before, past the station lights and out into the streets. It was Sunday night, February 2nd, 1986. The shops were shuttered, the traffic thinned to almost nothing, and the station lights faded behind her as she moved toward home. A sedan rolled through one of those lighted patches and slowed beside her. At first, it could have looked like any driver easing toward a turn, but it didn't keep going. It matched her pace, then edged closer, the engine idling low. Words came from the window, questions, directions, something meant to make her stop and lean in. Anita kept walking. The car crept again, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the door. Then it opened. Hands grabbed her hard, fast, and coordinated. She fought, twisting and trying to pull away, but there were too many of them. Her shoes scraped the pavement as she tried to brace. A second later, she was dragged inside. The door slammed. The car surged forward and disappeared into the dark streets beyond the station, leaving the sidewalk empty as if nothing had happened at all. Anita was 26, a nurse, and known in her community for being friendly and reliable. She had once won a local beauty title, but her life by 1986 was built on routines, work shifts, family calls, the same rails and streets. She was married to John Cobby, though the marriage had become strained and they were living apart. That night she was simply trying to get home from the station, close enough to familiar streets that her guard would have naturally lowered. When she didn't arrive, her family initially assumed she had stayed with a friend. It wasn't unheard of, and there was no immediate reason to imagine the worst. But the next day, when she failed to show up for work, worry turned to panic. On February 3rd, she was reported missing. Police took statements while her loved ones worked the phones, calling friends and hospitals, driving routes she might have walked, and returning again and again to the last confirmed point in her night. The station and the short stretch she would have walked from it. Every hour that passed made the silence feel heavier because there were no phone calls, no sightings, no simple explanation that fit. On the morning of February 4th, in a paddock at Prospect, New South Wales, a farmer noticed his cattle clustered in one spot, unsettled and refusing to move on. When he walked out to see what had them milling like that, he found a body. The shock hit fast. This was not an accident, not a natural death. Police were called. The paddock turned into a crime scene under floodlights, with tape fluttering and investigators moving carefully through grass bent under boots. The victim was identified as Anita. Her distinctive wedding ring was still on her finger, and it became part of how her identity was confirmed in those first hours. The injuries told detectives they were dealing with a violent abduction and murder carried out by more than one offender. Even without the public knowing every detail, the community reaction was immediate. People in Blacktown talked about nothing else. Women who had walked home from stations for years suddenly stopped. Parents checked on their daughters twice, then 3 times, and the grief quickly hardened into anger. A major investigation formed inside the New South Wales police force. Detectives chased early possibilities, someone close to her, someone with a motive, someone who knew her routine. John was questioned early because that was procedure, but he was cleared as the investigation progressed. What mattered now was the abduction itself. Multiple offenders, a vehicle close enough to pull alongside, and the confidence to take a victim near a train station, where someone could vanish in seconds if a car door opened at the right moment. A large reward was announced and tips poured in, some useless, some cruel, some desperate attempts to make sense of the senseless. Investigators sorted them line by line, looking for the ones that matched what little was firm, who had been out that night, who had access to stolen cars, who suddenly cleaned a vehicle, who bragged and then panicked. Gradually, the same cluster of names surfaced again and again. John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and 3 brothers, Leslie Murphy, Gary Murphy, and Michael Murphy, The tips described them together, moving together, talking together, the kind of group that fed off its own momentum and didn't stop to think about consequences until consequences were already racing toward them. As the pressure tightened, arrests followed. The case that had terrified a city shifted into the grim machinery of interviews, evidence handling, and court preparation. For Anita's family, those arrests were not relief so much as a new kind of dread. Now they had to endure the full accounting of what had been done to her, and they had to trust the justice system to hold. The story dominated headlines and talkback radio. People argued about punishment, about safety, about how this could happen to a woman walking home on an ordinary night, and about what it meant for every commuter who stepped off a train after dark. The trial began in March 1987 in the Supreme Court of New South Wales. The public followed every development, hungry for answers and consequences. Prosecutors laid out the central timeline. Anita was abducted near the station late on February 2nd, taken away from the area, assaulted, beaten, and killed. Her body was left at Prospect and found 2 days later. The defense tried to separate blame and minimize individual roles, but the picture presented to the court was of a group crime, multiple men participating in the same violent chain of decisions. On June 10, 1987, the verdicts came. All 5 men were found guilty, and each received life imprisonment with additional time. Outside the courtroom, there was no celebration, only a heavy knowledge that justice could never restore what had been taken, and that the emptiness left behind would never be filled by any sentence. For Anita's family, the case did not end with convictions. Her name stayed in Australia's memory because the crime reshaped how people thought about commuting and the ordinary act of walking home at night. In Blacktown, friends remembered her as a nurse who should have made it home and never did. In Prospect, the paddock returned to quiet after the floodlights were gone, but the place remained tied forever to what was found there. Years passed, but the shock of that night never fully left the communities that had watched it unfold. Anita's last walk from the station became a warning carried from one generation to the next, proof that routine can turn deadly in seconds, and that some crimes leave scars far beyond the victim and far beyond the moment they happen. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.